Thank you, Eugenio. Well, the topic of the lecture has to do with the mental parasites, which is also the theme of my recent book. I don't know if anyone has read it. Some have read it, the others are still going to read it. But do it, because the truth is that I made a great effort to synthesize fundamental ideas of liberal thought in political philosophy and at the same time refute ideas that are progressive. So it's a good synthesis, a good introduction, like the Economist Kaiser for economics. This is for the other ideas. Here there are going to be several controversial topics that we are going to touch on. And look, the original idea that certain beliefs, this is important for you to know, are installed in the brain as neuronal parasites. You can find it in a book by Richard Dawkins. He is one of the most famous biologists in the world, English or British, who is a professor at Oxford. And he wrote a book in 1976 called The Egoist Gene. In that book, Dawkins explains that ideas, beliefs, are installed in your nervous system in the brain. And that they are also replicated from brain to brain. That is, you can infect another person with your ideas, just as a virus is infected. This is not an air phenomenon, it is a biological phenomenon. So there are beliefs, he says, they must be considered living structures. Have any of you seen the movie Inception by Leonardo DiCaprio? Yes. How does the movie start? Do you remember how how does the movie start? DiCaprio comes out, he is Mr. Cop speaking. What does he say? He starts with a question, he says, what is the most resilient parasite? And he says a bacteria, a virus, an intestinal worm. And he says no, an idea. Once you plant an idea in a person's brain, it is almost impossible to eradicate it. So if you do not believe in Dawkins, believe Leonardo DiCaprio. Well, but I opened the book with that thesis because here we are dedicated to what? In the Professor Foundation, to defend ideas, to spread ideas. We believe that you think. The problem with mental parasites is that they do not let you think. So the one who uses the concept of a parasitic mind, originally Richard Dawkins. It is not even Gad-Sack in his book The Parasitic Mind. That for the rest, there is no plagiarism in my book with the book of Gad-Sack. It is an idiot who invented the pro-pedophilia of Baradid. And who repeated the leftists everywhere and repeated it again recently. A mental despicable who is going around everywhere and who fights with everyone. And he sends threats later because he is crazy. How does Gad-Sack explain that for the rest he must have attributed the idea to Dawkins? And he does not, as I do attribute it to him. They are patterns of thought, systems of belief and attitudes that prevent thinking with clarity and precision. They are patterns of thought that prevent them from thinking. It is simply a programming, just as you can program a computer. Your brain is programmed to react in a certain way that does not aim to clarify a certain matter. But basically to generate a certain type of attitude, a certain type of behavior or conditioned response. So that's what they are neuroparasites. That's what Sack calls them, neuroparasites. Why? Because again, this is super important, they are installed here in the nervous system. They are in the nervous system of human beings, it is not an irrelevant issue. I always explain that there are beliefs that can depress you. If you convince yourself that no one loves you, that the world and the universe are against you, have you seen depressed people or when you yourself have gone through dark phases? How do you think? Well, you are reinforcing those feelings with false beliefs. Because obviously the most likely thing is that it is not true, that no one loves you and that you are a loser, and that you will never reach any part of your life, and that the universe confuses itself so that nothing results. And there are therapies based on changing the way people speak. Why? Because that way you redesign those neural circuits, you redesign them, and you get out of that habit that is learned and that is in the brain. So be careful with that topic, neuroparasites. The great Hayek, in his article from 1949 on intellectuals and socialism, explained this, that he did not talk about neuroparasites. He did not reach that level of biological analysis. But he did point out with all clarity that socialism was an invention of very few intellectual people, and that he had taken a great effort to be able to spread it to the people, to the common people, to the proletarians, until the Janet Jarrah of this world appeared, saying that they wanted to destroy capitalism and everything else that now supposedly does not want. Like Cuba is a democracy. Have you found Janet Jarrah's mind functional? Janet Jarrah is the example of a completely parasitized mind, and that is why she is so dangerous, because she represents the worst of a totalitarian doctrine that has as one of its fundamental acts as the systematic lie as a form of political action. But these systematic lies are of such nature that many times they are not able to distinguish the truth. When she says that Cuba is a democracy, the question is whether she believes it or not. And there is one of two. Well, she doesn't believe it and she lies, right? And finally, one could say, at least she still has some connection with reality, or even worse, she does believe that it is a democracy. And she is not lying, she says it legitimately, in the case in which she does not have a worm in her head or a parasite. She has a constrictor in her head, because of how parasitized she is. But those people are extraordinarily dangerous because they cannot think rationally. They are programmed as tools and instruments of ideology that have infected them. And obviously all this, that I am social democrat, is a pose of pure political opportunism to convince the people who vote for her tomorrow if she gets to power, and they have the possibility to fully concentrate it in their hands and crush us all. They do it, as they have done everywhere. And that is why it is not irrelevant that she says that Cuba is a democracy, because in reality she admires that model. That is what she aspires for Chile if she could. It is up to you to say no here, because of course you lose the election if you say that. But that is what she thinks. The same thing is true for Lautaro Carmona. In a certain sense they are people with a mental illness. It is that they are. They are really alienated. And that is why Jean-Francois Rebel, who had been a communist, he stopped being says no, he became parasitized. He maintains that socialism is an agenda of the dark side of our intelligence. He says that it is an intellectual pathology. And that is what it is. They are pathologies. It is not just that intellectual beings necessarily have a correlation in how our brains function. That is, about our nervous system and everything else. Another example. Did you know that Iran, in the war against Iraq, which was in the 80s, 81s, I do not remember exactly, Iran sent thousands of children between 8 or 6, 7, 8, 9, 12, 13, 14 years old to the minefields, to the mines, walking on the mines, breaking the children to open the way for the soldiers who came later. From their children, he made all the way, and the one who is now, in the name of Allah, and the triumph of the Islamic religion, other version of them of the Islamic religion. At that level, pathological infections of ideas can arrive. That is something that I do not know of any other country that has done it that way, or of other groups that have done it, that are not infected by some radical pathology, religious or whatever. And a very clear example of, have you seen the Alien movie? it is true that there is a mother alien that gives birth to all these other infected creatures. Well, Marx is clearly the mother alien, because aliens are parasites. If they get in and then explode around here and kill you. They are parasites. Look at you. This is very interesting to see. That Marx was an intellectual fraud. This is said by Bertrand Russell. You can read it in the essay Why I Am Not a Communist. This is a very important English philosopher of the 20th century. One of the great philosophers probably from the last century. That he was not a libertarian, he was not a conservative. He has an essay that is also called Why I Am Not a Christian. He is a philosopher who likes the left a lot, but he has an essay that says Why I Am Not a Communist. And there it is. We have published with FBP, May to God 7. And he says a couple of things that you have to remember to also know where jar comes from. Note that this is very current what we are discussing here. He says that Marx had a confused mind and that his thinking was almost entirely inspired by hatred. I ask you, when you are moved only by hatred, what do you do? When you are moved only by hatred, what do you do? I ask you, when you are moved only by hatred, can you be rational? Can you have a capacity to think clearly? Can you be just? Can you be moral? Can you be ethical? Not a possibility. And that is why Russell says that the theoretical principles of communism are false, and their maximum in practice produce an unquantifiable increase in human misery. But in addition, Russell says in that essay that Marx deliberately designed his arguments by transversing reality to infuriate proletarian masses. That is, he was a liar. He was a true intellectual fraud. Russell says it in that essay, Why Am I Not a Communist? And then he talks about the Soviet Union, and the millions of deaths of the Soviet Union and all that. This man refutes, destroys. He's not the only one. There are many others who have done it with Marx, obviously, but I find it interesting that it is Russell, a thinker who no one can qualify as liberal, libertarian, conservative, or anything like that. If you look at Marx, if you look at him, Marx is a clear example of what he is. Marx is a clear case of pathogen infection, described by Richard Dawkins in his book, The Egoist Gene, where he says that when an idea in the scientific community becomes fashionable, it gets infected like a meme. The one who uses the concept of memes is Richard Dawkins, and the meme gets infected from mind to mind. Here is a very interesting paper, published in the Journal of Political Economy, one of the top journals in the United States, where they analyze the number of quotes in the academic world of Marx. Marx is today the most cited thinker in human history, the most cited only at Platon level. Now, if you compare it here, there is a table where you compare the number of quotes. This is before the Russian Revolution of 1917. Before the Russian Revolution, Karl Marx was a marginal thinker, and Marx died a lot before the Russian Revolution. He was a marginal thinker. John Stuart Mill had much more quotes. Adam Smith had much more quotes than Marx. Herbert Spencer, how many of you have read or heard about Herbert Spencer? He was much more famous than Marx in the academic world, therefore in public discussion and everything else. What happens is that when the Russian Revolution occurs, Lenin and the Bolsheviks make a tremendous propaganda about Marx. And since it was an extraordinarily relevant event in the 20th century, one of the most relevant, then Marx starts to have a status that he didn't have before. And today, by far, he is the most cited, especially in humanities and social sciences, Karl Marx. This is where he is most cited. And then all of you who go and study humanities, wash their brains with Marx's texts. And then they put Lenin in here. Instead of going through his chest, he starts to eat his head. But I'm not saying that this is wrong to read Marx. You have to read it. The problem is that they adopt you with Marx. And they don't make you read Hake's criticism. Or they don't make you read Bertrand Russell's Why I'm Not a Communist. They don't make you read those things. They make you read only the Communist Manifesto. or something from the essays on capital development, or some other of the questions he wrote, of the many that he wrote, the manuscripts, whatever. So then people go out to read. Do you think that in some humanities faculties, Milton Friedman or Hayek or Mises pass them? Or Nehinger's criticism of the Marxist system? No, they don't pass them. They don't pass them. They don't pass them. Because for the left-wing people, not the social democratic left, for the Marxists in general, the truth doesn't matter. What Russell said. The truth doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is power. You have to lie systematically to get power. In that parasitic mind that they have, they do it. They won't show you the other side of the coin. They won't show you the alternative thinkers. They will show you how to distort it, so that you can match their diagnosis. Here, you see in Marx, this is the number of quotes that Marx would have had if they weren't for the Soviet propaganda, until the year 32. And this is the one that he had. This is the year 32, an estimate. This is the estimated and this is the real. And here you see that this is shot. And this is done like this. Like this. How many of you have heard of Rodbertus? Well, that's how Marx would have been known. So this is contagious, and today it is so absurd in the academic world that if you don't pay attention to Marx and say, no, he was a great thinker, he was wrong in things, but he was a great thinker, they look at you as if you were not someone serious. A great thinker in what? If you read the biography of Essays and Berlin, Marx actually demolished it. In an elegant way, but he completely demolished it. He was a type, a prophet of a religion, that's what he was, of a pseudo-religion. He was plagued with parasites. He later infected millions of people. And this is very important because since the political ideas that one has are not irrelevant, we have to start criticizing them and analyzing them, because they have an effect on people's mental health. And here I am not talking about what I was telling you, the typical self-flagellating speech that happens to many people, that they are defeated, that they are depressed, that the only thing they do is get hurt with those speeches, and that it is sad, and we all have to be aware of not falling into that, and it has not happened to all of us. We are human beings, but we do not have to fall into that because they are false ideas. They are false ideas that do not help us, they do not take us forward. But our psyche gets used to that. Here is an article by The Economist from last year that quotes several studies. And this article by The Economist claims that left-wing people, I just said it in Argentina on a television program, I do not know if you saw it, left-wing people are more sad and tend to have more mental pathologies than people who are conservative. That is, people who are conservative, or what we call classic liberals. And probably also the libertarians, although a little different from what a conservative in English. And it says that this is not only in the United States, that this is globally in all aspects of the world. Left-wing people tend to be more sad and tend to report higher levels of mental pathologies. And it says the progressives are also much more likely than the conservatives to report having been diagnosed with a mental illness. Why is this? Let's think about it for a second. What does progressivism teach you? What did Marx teach you? What was the feeling that motivated Marx? Hate, according to Russell, right? What moves the progressives? Anger, envy, frustration, the false feeling of helplessness. Sometimes they have good intentions, of course, too. But the idea that the world is a terrible, horrible place. That Greta Thunberg is right and the world is going to end up tomorrow. Except if she goes out with her handkerchief doing some kind of maneuver. Then she's able to fix things. Because it seems that the climate change is not paying her enough. I have always considered people so stupid that they take it seriously. But I have always considered people so stupid that they take it seriously. But I have always considered people so stupid that they take it seriously. I have always considered people so stupid that they take it seriously. I have always considered people so stupid that they take it seriously. I had this fight with my friends. You have to be really stupid to take a stupid person who doesn't know anything about science seriously. And this is not personal against her. But she is a sissy who doesn't know anything about science. She never knew anything about science, who was used politically, and who also had serious mental health problems. And everyone would look at her as if she were, I don't know, the new messiah who was coming to save the planet. A delirious thing. And then you realize that you are the mental parasites. And then you realize that you are the mental parasites. Because believe me, the world is not going to end because of climate change. Because believe me, the world is not going to end because of climate change. All that is not true. A climate apocalypse is coming, I tell you from there. I was one of those who believed that because I had infected the parasite. And then I started reading because I had an open mind and I realized it was a lie. There are problems like that, but the planet is not going to end. If the planet ends, it's going to be because of artificial intelligence. Some of those things. Or because Genetica is going to win the presidency of the Republic. Well, this is super important. Here we are going to get into issues that are quite controversial, but real. You can see here. Here they ask. Liberals are actually super progressive, right? In English, liberal is someone on the left. And they ask people how satisfied they are with their lives. In this picture here, well, men on the left compare with conservative men. I mean, it's almost double. And women on the left compare with conservative women. Women on the left are the least happy of all. And women on the right, conservative women, they are twice as happy or more, in proportion to women on the left, with their lives. Then, when they ask how satisfied they are with their mental health, to the people, these are the men, the women on the left, and these are the non-liberal men and women. Obviously, it's not that everyone on the left is like that. No, it's not like that. But there is a tendency, a big number, a very marked tendency. I'm talking about the politics of depression, that there are political beliefs and political speeches that make you depressed. Think about a woman on the left, whom you convince that her life is a disaster because there is a patriarchy that oppresses her, and that will make it impossible for her to get ahead. All men are bad, they are rapists, etc. And many end up believing that. How can you be happy like that? It's difficult, isn't it? As the saying goes, and if you are a mother tomorrow and you are married, the most beautiful thing that can happen to you is having a child. That's why the species exists. If our ancestors, 30,000 years ago, had thought that it was so unpleasant to have a child, probably none of us would exist here. All species have that instinct of reproduction. It's part of nature of living beings, of reproduction, isn't it? Well, and our beings are programmed also for that. Well, there's a feminist that in 1963, if I remember correctly, wrote a book called The Feminine Mystique. And that book, Betty Friedan, says that the home for women is a concentration camp with comforts. So, as a woman, the worst thing you can do is to think about getting married and having a child, because that is your slavery. That is your Auschwitz. Being stuck with children you love and with whom you are taken care of. That is the worst thing that can happen to you. And what does feminism do then? That's why there is the pro-natal feminism. And there is another form of feminism, which is the pronatalism, which does not mean that the decision to not have a child is not legitimate. I am not arguing that. There are people who can be perfectly happy without having a child, but it is false. That you're necessarily going to be in a concentration camp. You are going to be marked, you are going to be unhappy, and you are going to waste your life. That is a lie. So now you have this movement in the United States of pronatal feminism, which is claiming the value of motherhood for women as well. Something that is necessary because the numbers of births are so bad that they are collapsing the population everywhere. So, of course, if you are one of those women, like the vast majority, in some way you do miss having a family, because in the survey that is what they show. And then you have by the same time you come with this programming that I am losing if I have a family, and the only thing that benefits the man, which is what feminists say, even though you're going to probably be a little unhappy. So what happens? Because of your system of beliefs. So what happens is that you see that conservative women end up having less mental health problems. Then I am interested to know what you think, especially the women here. that see you here in the survey and the question of who are the happiest people with their family life. Conservative women are the happiest of all. The ones who are married with children and with a system of beliefs according to what they are doing, they are the happiest. And the most unhappy are the women on the left. Why? And here the study explains that many simply decide not to have children. When you talk about family life here, it does not mean that they are necessarily married with children, but that there are many people who do not have children. Of those who ask, conservatives tend to have a higher nationality. In fact, it is said that in the United States, Republicans will overcome Democrats in the end, because Republicans have more children than Democrats and all that. And it's not a joke. There may be something about that is true. Look, this is not irrelevant, and it is not casual. It is not that there is a gene that makes the women conservative of other women different. No, they are the same. And the same with men, they are the same. Right? So what is happening? The issue that you are seeing today, I do not have this in the book, for mental health, but I think it is interesting to add to the discussion that we are having, because it is very illustrative of what is especially touching to you. To me too, but especially to you. Yes, we are not that far either. Well, if you see, this is a graph that reflects the ideological, political vision of men and women between 18 and 29 years, from 2002 to 2020. And you see, more or less, they were in a very central vision, very balanced. Both men and women shared more or less the same vision of the world. In ideological, political terms, more or less, there was a consensus. What happens with time? The men and the women begin to diverge more and more. The women begin to become more and more left-wing, more and more progressive, more and more liberal, and the men become more and more conservative. So what you're having here, in the FPP, because we are all classical liberals, so here this graph makes a straight line. It does not apply here. So look for a partner. Here in the FPP, no more. Because outside the house you will find that they appear. Sorrows of the Wide Front, Pierre Gonzalo, in Taor, Kalinet Jara. Well, here, what is remaining in evidence is that there is a radicalization of the sexes, a war of the sexes, right? Because of the systems of belief, and there are also intellectual pathogens in the male world that get into what is called, not to mention the manosphere, where is Andrew Tate, and people like that. Obviously, I do not put all the left-wing people in the manosphere, but I do not think Andrew Tate is the best reference, although he is right in several things, but I do not think he is the best reference when it comes to inspiring young men. What happens is that the others go so far that in the end one hears Andrew Tate and says, what relief. Because the others say, if you give him a gun to play your 5-year-old son, you are turning him into a male oppressor of toxic masculinity. Go to hell. And that is what the proggers believe. When Kate Milton gave him the princess of William's wife, he gave his children toys to play with. It was a scandal. All the left-wing people went crazy. And that was an example. You cannot score goals because not all children can suffer. Because no one wins and no one loses in this life. And that's how they start, with all that nonsense. So this is a problem. This is a problem. And here we need many women who do parasite other women, because we are not going to fish a lot. But women have a super important space of influence here. And this is not about the only legitimate life model is the conservative with 20 children. No, it is not that. It is simply that you have the tools to make a rational, informed decision about the course of your life and what is happening in your society. Nothing more than that. That's all. They do not convince you that acting according to your nature is often the worst thing that can happen to you. Because if you think about it, Susan Pinker, who I think is very good, at the end, what has feminism done? Feminism has told women to be men, and they will be happy. So what you have to do is pursue religion, status, money and power. That's what you have to do. Forget the rest. So if you are a man, you will be happy. But it turns out that our biology is different. We have different preferences because our nature is also different. So today, the pressure, in fact, is more culturally. It is much more the career, the money, this, the other, more than building families. And that does not mean that. This is full of men with whom it is worth building a family. I am not saying that either. Men are also staying in a deficit of wanting to take responsibility, of moving forward. They are staying much further back in a lot of things. So it is a problem. And some are also raising very hard ideas that are not positive. But here you can see a little the sensitivity by topic, according to the ideologies. Again, those who define themselves as feminists, you can see that. Obviously, this is from 18 to 29 again, 10 people. You can see that there are many more women. Well, there are other questions. More. Here is one that is important. It has gone too far, proving women's rights. And this has generated resentment in the male world because obviously, think of it the following way. When you get a job, and they tell you that not only because you are a man, when there are special quotas for women in a lot of things, when, in some way, your role as a provider, and everything is denied, you are no longer necessary for absolutely anything. And all those laws of gender perspective. Here in Chile, they even give away a prize to judges who fail with gender perspective, which is actually failing with a Marxist perspective. That is gender perspective. It is Marxism. It is basically the theory that we live in a patriarchy on which capitalism is founded, and that this patriarchy is made nothing more than to benefit the white heterosexual man, but that patriarchy is made to benefit the man. Therefore, all languages are made to benefit the man. All social institutions, all culture, all values, everything is made to benefit the man. And therefore gender perspective, what it does, is correct that injustice by putting the woman in the role of to prioritize the woman, let's say, and give her a different treatment against the law. So it is no longer applying the law the same for everyone, no. There is one law that applies to one and another law that applies to another, with which you destroy the same principle against the law, which is precisely what the Marxists were looking for, what the left-wing people have always looked for. In this identitarianism, since there are some groups that are victims of others, you cannot treat them all the same because the victim has to be treated much worse, and he has to have less rights in the background, because with this you balance the abuse and oppression of the group that oppresses. In this case the men. Probably all those things generate resentment, it is clear, and that is not positive. And well, this has political consequences. You know that young women vote predominantly on the left. Young men in general vote on the right, not only in the United States, in many European countries, in other parts, in Argentina too. I don't know, here in Chile I imagine it is similar. I have not seen it. I hope it is so. In case you go to the second round, which not all women support either. And well, then, that is like the introduction, and the theoretical framework, and some mental parasites that I treat in the book will pass quickly now. The first one is the one of social justice. The one of social justice is one of the most persistent and most pernicious. In my opinion, the book that most influenced in the West in the last half-century is this, The Theory of Justice by John Rawls, who was a Harvard professor. And this book is from the 70s. Basically what Rawls raises. I am going to summarize. I am not going to explain the whole theory, because we are going to talk too much. But what Rawls raises, which I find problematic in this book, is that only inequalities that are products of merit are justifiable, and does that go to the benefit of the most disadvantaged. You have heard these people who say, well, but it is not your merit, what your parents gave you, so you don't deserve it. These are Rawls' ideas. People repeat them, but they come from there. What is the problem with this argument? What would you say is the weakness of this mentality? Because in the book we say, we like meritocracy, and then what is not your merit? But we refer to another idea of meritocracy, Why is it wrong to say that it is unfair that you have, I don't know, your father worked and did well in his life and inherited money and properties, and they tell you, but your inheritance is not your merit, or that you did not earn it, your father earned it. Then the state has to come and take away a part of that, at least to compensate the other. How? From the economic point of view, obviously, there is no stupidity, because punishing inheritance is punishing the accumulation of capital, and therefore impoverishing the whole society. Obviously, that is obvious. But there is a philosophical, moral problem with the argument. It is also worthy that a father chooses where his inheritance goes and makes his money and all his money. Of course, yes, it is true. Who says that it is unfair? Yes, there is a little bit more, yes. There is a song that says, social injustice is unfair. Is it fiscal injustice? That's good. Whose song is that? It seems to me that it is a mischievous band that doesn't inherit money. All of the inherited money, of course. Yes, I hear it. Yes, because Bad Bunny. I do not imagine that he is going to produce something so sophisticated, unless that it is understood when he sings it. Yes, the problem is that fundamental is who defines what merit is, and when it has, and does not have. Because if a person is born in a family accommodated, for example, with money, what? Was a family is integrated by family conflicts and everything else, and it affects him a lot in life. Who gets ahead? A person in a family with much less resources, but perfectly stable, well constituted, etc. We know that it benefits children a lot. Who has more merit? If you get ahead, who has more merit? A person with social network and social capital, or a person with superior intelligence regarding what he has achieved in life? Who has more merit? Is it a merit of Lionel Messi to play as he plays? Sure. Why? He does not have any genetic condition that favors him to play better than others. He does not have a natural talent. You would say, he does not have a natural talent. It is part of the effort. And all other footballers who play the same way. Even more? Do you think that there are now thousands of tennis players who play the same amount of work or more than those who play Djokovic or Roger Federer, or any of them, and do not get to be top 20 or 50? Was it a merit of Albert Einstein to have developed the theory of relativity? To what extent is it a merit of Albert Einstein? Do we agree that Albert Einstein had a superior intelligence? Do we agree that that is genetic? What part of you? Is it a merit of you to have a superior intelligence? Did you go and choose God to give you a superior intelligence, and you won it in a competition? No. Is the intellectual coefficient correlated with genetics? That is known. Same thing happens with natural talent for some things. Obviously, Messi is not a normal person. I could have played the same amount of work as Messi or more, and I probably wouldn't have arrived where Messi arrived. And there are many cases like that, of people who really did it. And it is not that Messi has come far. It is that he is the best in history, or at least one of the best in history. Yes or no? Who determines how much of Messi's talent is, and how much it is that you have been able to get to Barcelona since you were very young, that you were with parents present who helped you get ahead, that you had the money to pay a lot of things, that you had a natural talent that others don't have, that you have a physical structure, because if Messi was half 2 meters, he wouldn't play as he plays, that you have a physical structure that allows you to play that way. Or Michael Jordan, the best basketball player of all time, I don't know, 2 meters. Difficult if he had measured 1 meter and 80. No, yes, but it's fine, but to reach that level, there are many things that don't depend on you. And well, I'm not surprised at all. But then the question is, where is the genius? The omnipotent being, as David Hume said, the Scottish philosopher said, that it is so gigantic the uncertainty of merit that you would require from a god, from a superior being, to be able to determine who has merit and how much. It's completely impossible to know who has more merit than others. You can intuitively know who has more merit, but you can't know. And what's the problem? That you, to comply with Rawls' thesis, have to have a centrally planned state, if you follow a strict vision of meritocracy, in this objective sense, not in the subjective sense, that we defend the liberal, that merit is what the market determines, and period. You can work very little, earn a lot, because you have a lot of talent, whatever, and it's fine. You are the owner of what you have. You would need that central authority. And if you wanted people to have an absolute equality of opportunities, so that everything is their merit, you would have to intervene their genetics. You would have to intervene their family. You would have to intervene their socio-economic situation. In the end, what you would have to do is an order that goes beyond the totalitarian. It's an order that is completely homogeneous, that is only possible within a matrix, or with clones. You have clones, but they also have to have the same experience on the first day, because everything else can alter, basically. If you got together with a person who gave you good ideas to get ahead of a business, it's not your merit that you meet that person with a coffee when you are having a latte macchiato, or if it's your merit. No, that's luck. But there is also another topic, that the right to property in a free society cannot depend on a notion of merit, because that makes it depend on what the authority defines what is fair and what is not. And that's where social justice comes in. We redistribute for social justice. The right to property depends on the fact that the exchanges have been fair, nothing more. And if I became a multimillionaire working, and I want to give everything to my children, it's fair because I own what I have. Simply because of that. And winning the lottery is unfair? No, but it's not my merit to win the lottery. I couldn't have found the ticket voted. What is the merit? That I have to win the lottery? That I bought the ticket? It's not much merit, right? But according to the theory of natural lottery, because that's what Rawls says, natural lottery, that you had more skills, and you were born in a better family, and you have to correct everything. Is it fair that I'm going to win the lottery? What an absurd thing Rawls says. Luck is not unfair, it's luck. It's neither unfair nor unfair. And for the same reason, it's not unfair that your father owes you more. From a certain point of view, it's the most fair thing that exists, because it's the obligation of the parents and the children's right to give the best opportunities to their descendants and receive them from their parents. It's a moral obligation. I don't want my son to suffer the worst when I die. It would be a little indecent, immoral, right? Parents work hard for that, for their son to be better than them, and give him good opportunities and everything else. Those are some of the problems that we have with the concept of the merit of grace and equal opportunity. Equal opportunity is a fallacy. It never existed, and it can't exist, because you would have to establish a totalitarian system that has never been seen. It's that simple. That doesn't mean that you can't improve opportunities, that there are no public policies to improve opportunities, but equality of opportunities is something else. It implies that there are no differences, that there are no distances, and that's where we're talking about a totalitarian order that would be incompatible with the first principle of Rawls' justice for everything else. That is, all the rights that Rawls assigns. In the first principle of justice, the right to life, to freedom and other things, are incompatible if we draw those conclusions from the second principle. Therefore, it's not that Rawls is defending a totalitarian order, no. But if you follow your vision of meritocracy, you could end up in that. Two social rights. Another problem. This is loved by Fernando Atria. Unfortunately, social rights were collected in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This gentleman, D.H. Marshall, a sociologist, who wrote this in the 50s in England, where he says that social rights are the condition for equal citizenship. Atria said this everywhere. He repeated this text everywhere. And just as there is equality before the law, there has to be equality of education, equality of health, equality of pensions, everything. because otherwise we are not equal citizens. Therefore, the state has to control everything and eliminate the private sector in all these areas. And that's what Pacheco tried to do in his second government. Obviously, he didn't get there, but the idea of getting rid of the states comes from there. For example, destroying the ISAPRE also comes from there. Adria said this while he was sending his son, we know, to the most expensive school in Chile. And Article 25 says this in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, because this was incorporated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights by pressure from the countries of the Soviet orbit. The countries of the Soviet orbit, as they didn't have, had to compete with bourgeois capitalism in terms of respect for individual rights, freedom of expression, life and all that. They set a trap and say, but we give all these things to people for free. Those who weren't true either. But we give all these things for free to people who aren't called social rights necessarily. What? Because they don't use that concept here. But they are social rights. And they are rights that the West doesn't give them. The capitalism of selfish people who pursue their interests and who don't have their area. So we want to put this article in. And why? Because with that they win a battle of media propaganda, which is the idea that they are superior to the West in respect of some human rights that are this. This is the story of why the article is there. It wasn't in the original Declaration of Human Rights, which was basically a reaction against all the genocides that we have seen in the 20th century, the Nazi Germany, everything. In fact, the way, the freedom, the property, all that was there. Well, then these rights are put in, and then the second, third generation, or second, third and others come. I don't know how many generations. The question seems like the Avengers saga. And if you read this, basically, what it says, we repeat, is that all individuals have the right to live for free and will without working. It practically says that. Fantastic, wonderful. No, of course, but it is that. In paradise there is no shortage of resources. In the socialist paradise flow the springs of collective wealth, full, as Marx said. He uses that expression. Then you have this idea of the state of Nefactor, which is very, very nefarious, and that arises in Germany, like Otto von Bismarck in the 19th century. This is going to happen faster, but what basically happens is that the state of Nefactor, which loves all our left, and imparts some right, is very important because with that you make people dependent on political power. And when you make them dependent on political power, because you're giving them a pension, because you're giving them, I don't know, healthcare, or whatever, you make them manageable by political power, and dependent on those who hold power, and the system of pensions of distribution, which is the system of distribution, and which wants to involve all Chilean socialists, is a system invented by Mr. Bismarck. It was invented by the Germans in 19th century. It is the origin of the distribution system that is in casi todo planeta today. And we, in Chile, made the revolution to dismantle, for the first time in history, the distribution system and to pass an individual capitalization that takes the pensions to the politicians of the hands of individuals and private managers of that money. So you no longer depend on the political will to receive a pension. On the other hand, here, Bismarck says it will be a great advantage when we have 700,000 small pensioners getting their state income. An advantage for whom? The Chancellor. He was working for the king. Well, an advantage for the state, for those who control power, because that's how you are domesticated. They are not independent. Imagine if your income depended on me. If I gave each one of you a table at the end of the month, and I were your only possible source of income, what power do I have over you? Absolute. Absolute. Basically, I make you my slaves. If you don't starve, I can do whatever I want with you. Well, that was the idea that this man had, who was a genius, a political genius, of the en facto state, and this was the basis of the Nazi state after. People forget that. The Nazis developed a gigantic en facto state, with which they bribe. There is a German historian who talks about this. They bribe the German people in part to support them. People forget about that. And that's why Ludwig Herr, who was the architect of the German economic miracle after the post-war period, who was Minister of Agriculture and then Chancellor, says that the worst thing that can exist is the in facto state, which is the path to complete destruction of freedom and well-being. So that you realize, in the book everything is much more developed. Another typical parasite is the neoliberalism, but this is one that intends to do something good as something bad. The others intend to do bad things as good. And it's basically this idea that you have to bury the neoliberalism, as Bork said. And if you see the winter campaign, and me writing with that, I mean you can't get out of the cassette. And curiously, horror was smarter. It moderated. What's going to happen to the neoliberal system? That question already failed them. With the other constitution they tried to make. And what is neoliberalism? What is it? I've shown this before. Fidel Castro has a speech in 1994, where a left-wing group is everywhere in Latin America. And then they are together and he says, look, we see a big difference. We don't know what we are, but we know what we are not, and what we are not, and what we are not, and what we are not. And what we are not is neoliberal, he says. And what is neoliberalism? Well, Castro defines it. Castro, horror's mentor, he defines it, he says, it's capitalism. When you are anti-neoliberal, you are anti-capitalist. When you are anti-capitalist, you are a person who categorically rejects individual freedom, because it is understood that if you don't have the right to have your property, I just gave you the example, if I control everything, if you don't have the right to have it, you are the ones who are left without freedom, because capitalism is a system that allows private property to exist, and that people make the decisions they want to make with their life project, with what belongs to them, and what they are able to generate, and you don't depend on the state. Socialism, Cuba, is the opposite. Who controls all the resources in Cuba? Yeats' friends. You can't do anything in Cuba without asking Yeats' friends, and they don't leave you either, because what is there, they keep it. $900 million. Fidel Castro accumulated, according to Forbes, of wealth. $900 million. The prophet of equality, the idol of Mitchell Bachelet, and all these people. But no, the problem is neoliberalism, and this is one of the miserable, who has been spreading this toxic myth. Joseph Stiglitz, Nobel Prize in Economics, a repugnant communist. The worst communists are not ours. They are those who live in New York, do classes in Columbia, or in NYU, or in Boston and Harvard. They wear costumes that cost, I don't know, $2,000, or $3, and they preach and support all the socialist delinquents that we have in our region. This man openly supported Fidel Castro, he supported Chavez, he supported Morales, he supported Korea, he supported Kirchner, who spent a lot of money, and he supported, who else? Abriel. He wrote the profile of the 100 most influential people in the world. In the Time magazine, please. Super influential or leader of more than 1,000. Super Gabriel Bork. Gabriel Bork is not even caught in the coin, but nobody catches him. But he fixed this, because he was excited that Bork was finally going to destroy the neoliberal model of Milton Friedman and the Chicago Boys. From an interview where he says it, he was excited. He was orgasmic. Joseph Stiglitz, this miserable, the damage he has caused. And he does not pay the consequences, because he is going to New York. Well, now they are going to have a communist mayor, so hopefully they will expropriate everything, just as they like him in Cuba, that they will expropriate everything to Mr. Stiglitz. Probably not because he is going to be in the nomenclature, but yes, they are really the worst. The left wing is nefarious. I had to show it because I hate it a lot. Seriously. Well, I have it. From Punching Bull. Then we have the social responsibility of the business. We are going to be very short, and we are finishing. And this discussion is very important because it comes from the time that Milton Friedman wrote this article in the New York Times in 1970, and they say, look, let it be. The social responsibility of the business is to generate utility and maximize the value of the shareholders. There is no other. It is not the green areas. It is not the people's sports records. It is not that the prices of the food are artificially lowered. It is not any of those things. What is the danger? If you take the company out of its specific role, the company that produces food, what is the danger? If you take the company out of its specific role, what is the danger? If you take the company out of its specific role, what is the danger? If you take the company out of its specific role, what is the danger? Of the company producing food. Yes. But there is something more general. Still. What? Of course, in the worst case scenario, they would stop making drinks and die with those things. But yes, you know what happens. This problem, it starts to fail because it dedicates itself to other things, the resources, and the increase in the quality of the production of the drinks. It starts to politicize the company because it starts to be an instrument for the interests of the state. The state starts to use the company to satisfy purposes that correspond to defining the state with public policies, with the parliament, whatever. It does not correspond to a company that produces drinks beyond a certain level of regulation. To be concerned about whether there is a gym for the people who live in the commune, or whether there are green areas, or whether there is this or the other. It is not the role of the company. In addition, for that it pays taxes. For this to be useless, for them to steal everything, do those things. Right? Why the next day you can ask them to build hospitals with charges. And who pays for that? Do you think it is free? Yes, in part it affects the owners, but the owners have less money to invest. Less jobs are generated. Or you cannot improve the production processes, you cannot pay your workers better wages. That is not free. What politicians do is a soft stabilization of private property. Because they start to tell you that you fulfill roles that belong to the state. Does it correspond to the companies to be checking if a provider pays taxes or not? No. It does not correspond to the companies to be checking if a provider or a partner is complying with the labor laws. Do you remember the case? What was so scandalous? A pharmacy that they closed here. Do you remember why it was? It was something like that. Oh, exactly. They found out how to assault. So, since they were not sure about the pharmacy, supposedly to repeal the assault, they closed it. The government closed it. But who is responsible for the security in the streets? These useless troops that are governing. It is theirs. They are our employees, not the other way around. And we pay taxes so that at least we can walk quietly in the streets. And the only ones who walk quietly are them, with all the money they steal after being in those churchy foundations that they build. Like the station Caliganto and La Cerrada. Also the same. Imagine. Friedman said in this article that the businessmen who promote this because they lack it. You know, they are also the worst. These millionaires, multimillionaires, especially the sons of parents who did not build anything. They with their own hands, against what I have no problem with. But shut the fuck up. We lack social responsibility and the issue, and they themselves celebrate this and promote this. Because they are to blame for having too much and the others not. Friedman said, well, these people who promote this are embracing a non-adulterated socialism, he says. And if you take it to its logical consequences, what we are talking about here, basically the company becomes an administrative unit or directed by the state, so that it does what the state imposes on it as a burden. And here is the whole issue of global warming, the ESG. I have a whole article, that is, a whole analysis of the ESG. Do you know what that is? Environmental and social governance that has to do with the issue of climate change, sustainable energy, sustainable development. So this issue, well, it's all a fraud. It's all a fraud. I have all the data, the latest papers are showing that it is false. That the statistics do not give you that it is everything. Think about it, the ESG index, so that you can see how ideological this is. The ESG index of Philip Morris, who is a tobacco smoker, is far superior to that of Tesla, who makes electric cars and decontaminates the planet. Why? Because Elon Musk does not like them. Nothing more than that. Because Elon Musk does not want to put sexual diversity and all that stuff just to put it. Right? And this is the worst and most dangerous of all. Mental parasite is the diversity of equity and inclusion. Why is this mental parasite so bad? It sounds incredible. How can one be against the diversity of equity and inclusion? What a bad person. Right? Because this is the problem of this discourse, that the left embraces these ideas. And you remember George Orwell, how he analyzes the manipulation of language by totalitarian ideology. And that is why when they say something that sounds good, they are actually referring to the opposite. When Jar says that Cuba is a democracy, what he is actually describing is a communist system. When Ana Pioneer, the Communist Party that violated human rights, was actually attacking the respect of the rule of law. Because we were pursuing criminals. Right? And when they deny that there are human rights violations in Cuba and Venezuela, they say no. Well, because the Communist Party does not recognize that there are human rights violations in Venezuela. I don't know if Janet Jar does now, but she does not recognize it. So what are they saying? That human rights violations are producing a liberal democracy here where they are not. This is the complete opposite. The diversity here of inclusion, what is it? Basically, it is discrimination, inequity, and exclusion. The question is who? White men, heterosexuals to leave. In other words, if I have a group, and I tell them that there's a lack of diversity here of inclusion, what I am saying is that here, if I look at you and say, lack of diversity here of inclusion, what I am actually saying is that there are many of you here who are left over and have to leave. To replace them, I don't see any Afrodescendant here. Where are the Afrodescendants? They aren't, right? Lack of diversity here of inclusion. So they know, since we are 50 people and there has to be one, at least 15% has to be. So all of you who are in that corner leave. But if I am better, I have more capacity. I did better in the exams. But the diversity here of inclusion is not in favor. What a bad person. Yes or no? It is the most repugnant thing, because you know, this parasite points to the destruction of the Western civilization. With the others, more or less, you can live with it. Not with this one. This is what Elon Musk calls the woke mind virus. That threatens the Western civilization. And he is absolutely right. You can see here, for example, in Harvard. You have seen the fight between Harvard and Trump, right? That one can argue in some ways. But Trump is absolutely right in this. See, the admission level of Harvard. The 10th, right? Basically, in terms of results in the entrance exams, is the highest, right? And the first is the lowest. If you are in the 10th century, that is the 10% more capable, which got better grades. And you are white, you have a 15% off, basically, of rate of admission, basically, right? Or probability of being admitted if you want. If you are African American, you have a 56%. Then you have here. Let's see, look. If you are African American, with the third, which is quite low, you have a 5.2% probability of being white is 0.6%. And as an Asian American, well, Asian Americans are the ones who discriminate the most, right? They destroy you. In the 6th, as an Asian, you have a 2.5%. And as an American, almost a 30%. Do you think that's fair? And do you know what the explanation is? Why? It's that we need inclusion and diversity. So it doesn't matter that you are 10 times better than the other, but your color doesn't match. So you have to stay out. And this is supposed to be financed by all American contributors. Because Harvard has a debt of $40,000 million, but it receives thousands of millions from the federal government every year. And this is systemic racism. So what do they tell you? They tell you that they fight. They tell you that having an admission rate, which in the case, for example, of whites is half of Hispanics, at the same level of results, they are fighting systemic racism. But that's what they are applying. That's why I tell you that this is the mental parasite. That is finally the opposite of what it declares. Because what they are doing, and this is unconstitutional, in fact. Harvard lost a trial with the American Asian community. He lost in the Supreme Court. This is unconstitutional, and they do it anyway. He lost it not long ago. So, here they tell you, for example, an American Asian in the fourth, lower grade, has no chance of being admitted to Harvard, but an African American has a 12.8%. So, no, he is more than even an American Asian in the first grade. That's what he's explaining. That's what he's saying. In the lower grade, if you are an African American, you have the same chance of being admitted than someone who is in the high grade. If you are an Asian American, how is that going to be racism? Now, to close, where does this come from? And here I have to give a full talk today, because this is too deep, and I would have to analyze it with much more calm. But this is a summary in general. Do you recognize them? Who is naked? And this one? Jack Derrida? Wealthier? Mitchell Foucault? I don't know about this, but this one, yes. In any case, they were part of the pedophilia. What is the central thesis of postmodernism? These are the famous postmodern French philosophers. What is the central thesis? Exactly. That's it. The truth does not exist. I am contradicting myself because I have to understand that what I am saying is true. There, I was not very rigorous. Hold that the truth does not exist. That all those is what? What did they do? Establishing the power of some groups that dominate others. Everything is narrative. The standards of beauty are narrative. Obviously, the language is also a form of social construction made to discriminate, and therefore the inclusive language of girls and girls. The Carmenese, let's say, which is the most stupid thing I have ever heard of this inclusive language. Science is a narrative. Science is a narrative. Mathematics is a narrative. Isn't it true that 2 times 2 is necessarily 4? No. It is a narrative created by the white man to marginalize and discriminate against others. And since mathematics is racist, as it has been proposed in California, then the black should not be demanded from mathematics. I am not inventing it. This is a fact. Google it. So, what is the thesis of this? There is no truth. What is the West? A meta-narrative, nothing more. It is a meta-narrative that intends to affirm the domination of whom? Basically, the heterosexual white man. The norms of sexuality, of course, are another narrative. From there it is followed that you cannot criminalize pedophilia, sex with children. Why not? Because if all a narrative, and there is no objective truth, you cannot claim that it is immoral to have sex with a child, or that it is a form of rape. In fact, Mitchell Foucault, the most famous of all of them, and the idol of the whole postmodern left, and the whole front end, who have not read it, but he influenced them anyway. The idol of them, Mitchell Foucault, was a man, a tragic figure, an extremely promiscuous homosexual man, who paid children in Morocco, or in Tunis, I don't remember, I think it was Tunis, to have sex with them, in a cemetery. In a cemetery. But this is in accordance with their theory. They write a letter to defend French pedophiles. All this intellectuality, including Simone de Beauvoir, the mother of all feminists, the lover of Jean-Paul Sartre. They write a letter to all these intellectuals on the left in the 70s to defend man, condemned by pedophilia in France. And I found in an interview that after Foucault says that this is a marginal and discriminatory way, and everything else. And besides, he claims that he could perfectly be the child. We are talking about 3 years, 4, 5. There is no age limit. Because he says facultextual. There's no age limit. Are they the ones who start the sexual contact with adults? They perfectly can. That is the left. That is progressism. Do you remember the thesis of the University of Chile? That of the professor. To sleep with the student. I don't remember the title. Do you remember? Where do you think? I have not read them. But I am sure that Foucault is quoted everywhere. I would not be surprised at all. There is nothing like Redad, with his attack against reason, and logocentrism and all this. Everything ends up being nothing more than a social construction. So we have no way of knowing objectively what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad. What is right, what is wrong. There is no way, human rights. No social construction. So, is it bad, Foucault? No. In their theory, it doesn't have to be bad. Is mass murder of people bad? No, not necessarily. This leads to a very chaotic thing. Very chaotic. And they were very incoherent sometimes, when they reported one side or the other. But the essence of this philosophy is that charlatanery, that the truth does not exist, which is a stupidity, and that leads to the most absurd results, like questioning, and saying that there's a very famous paper that a physicist from the University of New York sent in 1996. Alan Soccer, who was tired of all this charlatanery, sent a paper to a newspaper that was published, and it was a paper that was trolling the newspaper, where he said that the contribution to astronomy that the indigenous tribes had done, I don't remember where, was as valid as the scientific theories of Galileo, Newton, Kepler, Einstein and all these people, and that we would have a very Eurocentric physics and everything, and it was something of a level of stupidity, and they publish it. They pass the peer review, and they publish it. The journal is called Social Text, if I remember correctly. Then that was repeated with the scandal of the year 2017, that there were 3 academics who sent many ridiculous paper journals, and they published it all. Of course, when you don't have a real idea, you can't have a criterion to establish if something is good or bad, if it's of quality or not, if it's correct or incorrect, and everything in a mess, in an incomprehensible, indigestible mess. How could Foucault tell Derrida that he was an intellectual terrorist, because he didn't understand what he wrote? So for Foucault to have found this, imagine how crazy it must have been. Well, I read Derrida. The truth is that Foucault understands much more than Derrida. Well, Foucault finally ends up dying of AIDS, because he says that all this campaign of doctors against, so that homosexuals use condoms and everything else, because the AIDS boom was a form of domination. So it was a speech, the medical speech to establish the domination of doctors about the homosexual community, and marginalize it and everything else. And he ends up dying, of course, because the condom is a social construction too. So, whether you put it on or not, the result is the same. This is delirious. It's crazy. And finally, well, the last mental parasite of the good indigenous. I don't know if you saw the movie Apocalypse. Did you see it or not? Those who haven't seen it, I recommend it. It's very good, very entertaining. Watch it. Because here is this idea of the good savage, the good revolutionary, that Karl Rangel speaks about in that book too. That here live, pure angels, in paradise, until the Spaniards arrived and brought the Western civilization. And the reality is that no, this is the reality. The Aztecs killed, sacrificed, from 30,000 to 40,000 people every year, from the Aledaña tribes, the Aztecs, the Mexicans, the Aztec successors. And these skull towers have been discovered in Mexico City, and include children, pregnant women, everything. That is reflected very well in the movie of Mel Gibson, although in that movie, I think only men who are sacrificing are seen. But no, I mean, the Incas made human sacrifices, and the situation of women too. The Mapuche, for example, were the owners of their women. They had several. The women were in practice. That is how the naturalist, Claudio Gay, from the 18th century, explains and says, the customs of the Moroccan people, and they could kill you. The husband could kill you if he wanted, and the work was done only by women. Men did not work. And in fact, a woman could give you the brother of the man who had died. Basically, they had no right. So it would have been fantastic to have returned with the indigenous constitution, customs in use, and the constitutional right of the indigenous people in the Moroccan, and in other parts, because in Rapa Nui it is not very different. Do you realize this stupidity? This anti-Western reaction? And the Lunconne, they're celebrating. The Lunconne celebrating this, when she should know. What was the situation of women regarding human rights in the indigenous world? And that was the case in all of Latin America, in all parts of Central America. What could best pass to America was the Spanish colonization. The rest are idiots. Idiots. That idea that here lived paradise and everyone was living happily and there was no war and there was nothing. Yes. Ask all the tribes close to the Aztecs who joined courts precisely, and they taught him that they preferred to be subject of the queen and to be subject and be massacred by Moctezuma. That was what the indigenous people said to courts, and that is not shown anywhere. And there is the clown of Lopez Obrador telling the king of Spain that he asks for forgiveness. No, as far as I remember, Lopez Obrador is not a Aztec surname. We are a mixture. That is the truth. But the Western civilization, with all the problems that it may have had once, is undoubtedly the best from the point of view of human and moral progress that existed in the history of our species. There is no doubt about it for me. We can debate it if you want, but I am convinced that it is so. So, buy the book, read it, and help me find these ideas to invite people. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Axel, and everyone for your attention. Now we're going to ask a few questions or else the food will get cold. So let's go with 2 people from the online team. We are going to start with Rodrigo. Go ahead. I was entertaining the talk. It is interesting to see you here, and not on YouTube, for example. So I had the doubt, because you criticized the state of benefactors. But then, to what point should the state serve? Because, for example, the other day I went to a talk with an ex-minister of social development, and he told us how in his vision of social policies, this should be to give an impulse to people more than to generate, like a bed. Did you understand the point? Yes, from my point of view, the state should not provide any service, nothing. What you can do is that the private sector does it, and for the most vulnerable people, to support them with a system of co-payment, or in the most extreme case, of financing, all with focused reduced. It is not the ideal of the anarcho-capitalists, but I think it is the minimum enough that is compatible with classical liberalism, but that the state does not have a school, that the state does not have a university, that the state does not have absolutely no hospital, because when the state has it, the politicians have it. And if the politicians have it, and the power network and the bureaucrats, it works badly. You know that the state health sector in Chile spends more on patients than the private sector. How many people are ready to wait? 40,000. And people who die, thousands every year. What are they doing with the money? They are stealing it. They are stealing it. Because this is a false license. And it is a way to steal. And they are spilling it too, because they do not lose it. So if you told me, what is your presidential program? Take that money that you spend on public health, divide it by patient, and spend it. And everyone is in the best hospital on the planet. And everyone can be treated in private clinics. Everyone. But who does not want? The politicians. Because they are their friends. They are their power networks. The aunt is working. The cousin is working. The sister-in-law is working. And why? In the left too, when the government. On the other side, they can paralyze the health system, put pressure on the government. So, that's the solution. And when we apply it with us, with the voucher system here in Chile, it worked pretty well. It worked pretty well. With the cut pay and profit, life selection and everything else, which obviously was eliminated by our friends who have a college in the Verbo Divino, in the Santiago College, and in the San Jorge. They could not allow that there be profit, no copy, no selection, in the schools of the town. I had a meeting with Mariana Owen on Twitter about this topic. As a graduate of a public state school in Villa, in a poor neighborhood called Los Ursulinos, she, of course, said that I was an ignorant to say that the state school should not have any schools. Why? That's the typical background patenting. In the rural case, as in a school in the middle of the town, why couldn't the state have schools? I don't know if it's necessary. I think that if you give enough incentives for a private manager or a private administrator to build a school, obviously not for 2 students, because that no longer makes sense, but you would have the possibility to manage it perfectly. If you want to build a school, it depends on how many students you have. I grew up in the countryside, in the south, and I remember that there were schools there. And if you have enough students, it's not a problem. The problem is if you have very few. Well, there you have to see what is most convenient. If it is to offer a transport, with transport facilities, so that people can go to a school that is around there, or build a small school that would not need. I think, I'm not an expert in this, but I imagine that we need 3 students, and the entire kindergarten, in the 4th and a half, from March 150, from pre-kindergarten to 4th and a half. I knew everyone's names, from pre-kindergarten to 4th and a half. We went out to play in the yard, and we grabbed a guy who had been in pre-kindergarten for 5 years, and he had some inflated tits, and he would throw himself on the couch, and put on a face like this, and we would say, and we knew him, the 4th and a half, playing with the kindergarten. It was something very nice, because it was a big family. It was not an anonymous thing, and all the parents knew each other. But that school had no weight of the state. They were all the powerful, they financed everything. But of course, there were more mediums. But the other thing is to see a good pay. We are going with a question, a little long, but it is interesting, especially for the debate. From Madrid, Spain, which is part of the FPP online. He says, hello Axel. I wanted to ask you this question, which may have been a constant in your career, but which lately seems to gain more relevance. In Argentina, liberalism that has emerged has had a certain relationship with conservative ideas, influenced by people who promote a fusion with a more traditionalist vision, linked to the new alternative right, and opposed to many principles of the left woke. However, some theses of that left woke, such as sexual freedom, could be compatible with liberalism, or directly not enter their field of action, since this is more focused on the ethical juridical aspects than the moral ethics. What do you think of this current alliance between liberalism and conservatism, both contradictory and strategic, necessary to achieve power? Could it represent a threat to social freedoms in the future? Well, since many here are falling asleep, I think they are going to talk about sexual freedom. Soon everyone will do so. That's one of the themes that touches more on conservatism, in some way or indirectly. I think it is necessary, an alliance, because the conservatism that is seen today, at least, is not an anti-market conservatism, except in some cases. Before, conservatism was anti-market. It was anti-market. It was nationalist. It was protectionist. There is something about that in the United States, with people around Trump. But if you have a rational argumentation, and well-founded on what freedom means, which are finally social structures, contradictions, that without family there is nothing. Hayek says that to you, and makes a real analysis of human nature. For example, the issue of sexual freedom. Obviously, everyone wants autonomy, that people decide. No one can pretend that the state controls people's lives and tells them what they can do and what they can't do in that matter. That is unacceptable. That said, it does not mean that you do not have a real discussion about the scope for a society, well, the scope for one sex and the other, what is called the hookup culture. This, fast immediate sex, and close, that has psychological effects, or social effects, or has an effect. There are people who can do very well with that, but there are people who do not do very well with that, and yet it becomes a fashion. So, one can talk scientifically about these issues and recognize that there are contributions of conservatism that are valuable in that, without going to the extreme, that now everyone has to come virgin to marriage, and the state has to control that before you get married. I mean, no, we are not talking about that. Simply that it is part of the discussion that we have and not a taboo. Let it not be a taboo and let them not tell you immediately that if you raise these issues, you are a retrograde, you are a mom, you are whatever. And this is because we are actually having problems of social disintegration, complex in terms of failure, or the formation of couples and families, and that is being reflected, in part also in these ethics of natality, that are disastrous, and not only in Chile, in the whole West and in a good part of the world, it is happening. So, I think we can reach and influence in many ways. Yes, perfect. Remember that there are two left, one here and another online. Good evening, Axel. Thank you very much for the talk. I wanted to ask you, if these are parasites, and you incite us to give the cultural battle, especially based on these 7 principles, how do we actually do it with the people who are already infected? Since there are people, the common Chilean citizen, not even the politician, who gets rich from this lie, that even if one explains it with reasons, they may not want to understand, and some react even violently. When it comes to closing public schools, closing health, they take it as an attack, even personal. What do we do to turn this situation around? Or we just give this generation for loss? Because if we go to what we have done, we are losing. I'm not so sure that we're losing. Look, today, the influence that social networks have is colossal. What happens is that you don't know what was the reality of Chile in terms of cultural and ideological discussion. When I left the university, there was nothing. The fact that you are all here, which seems more or less normal, this did not exist. There was a discourse that was, at that time, more moderate, social democratic. That was installed, and nobody argued much, and there was some consensus around the economic system. That's it. Then the radical left discourse began to gain more strength, and we created the FPP, and there was a reaction from other centers such as Libertad de Soroa and other things. But now I would tell you that there are a lot of young people, and I always laugh because when I left, nobody knew who Hayek was. Nobody. And my joke was, well, the only thing I knew was Salma Hayek, but I didn't know anyone but a couple of old people, because I had come to Chile, but nobody knew him. And today, I go to an auditorium, I give a talk in front of 1,000 young people, your age, and they all have heard Hayek. Do you know who Hayek is? Well, thanks to what? Well, institutions like this, but to YouTube, to Instagram, to TikTok maybe, without getting addicted. Of course, except for the videos where I'm talking there, yes. But I would tell you that the way is that and that what? I was showing you how the beliefs of men and women are diverging, is that the great fight is for the people who are not yet totally convinced, is the majority, because I don't think that the majority is so parasitized as to be completely unable to change their opinion. It makes more sense than not. No, let's give Boris 17 for lost anyway. Jackson, all those people. No, I think it was two Peter. No, too much marijuana, too much pot. No, too many days. At the end it ends up affecting a little intelligence. They are completely parasitized. I think that we have nothing to do with them. It can be good, maybe. Sunday one karting with them has a good time, and they will always have to offer you. You have no doubt. But no, forget it. But there is a segment of that generation that, I think, has realized something of something. I don't know if it is the majority or not. Obviously, because not. But there are others who have already realized that these guys were liars, that one is a liar, that they are incompetent, etc., and corrupt. But in any case, it is the generation of you in which I have more hope, the ones that come down. They are the best, because it is there where it has been possible to plant, in a much more fertile way, the germ of freedom, the compromise of the rule of law and the truth, which is what saw the triumph of my law, with whom I have been for a very short time, now in Buenos Aires. If you see the voting of my law, 16 years you can vote in Argentina. 16 to 24 years I get a 70%. And that is what allows him to make the leap and win the presidency. And now I think it will go very well. In the October elections, parliamentarian, Argentina is changing. We cannot sing victory in advance, but it is changing. They have not managed to do the damage they wanted to do. And if they have done it, why not us? I mean, Argentina was not the most probable country to have a libertarian revolution and fundamental change in that sense. To me, it gives me a lot of hope to see you here. It gives me a lot. Because I think that there, in your hand, is that we are going to create the movement that allows Chile to get us out of this prison in which the state is putting us, and to deparasitate us mentally. You come much more hygienized with a cleaner brain, and the others are very outspoken. And I hope they never forget that. Never forget it. Well, if Janet Jar comes out and chooses president, I do not know. I think I'm going to go back to a front runner, and I am going to start smoking poro every day, because it is the only way I am going to endure my existence on this planet. Seriously. Let's go with the last question. This is from Pucuri from San Carlos. As well as biological parasites invade, mainly weakened bodies, is it not that communism advances in Chile because our society is culturally fragile, without convictions or intellectual defenses against totalitarian ideas? What should we strengthen first? The economy, the institutions, or the cultural base? I'm not so convinced that communism as such advances, because what Jar did was try to disguise himself as a social democrat. And besides, he is so nice. He has that smiley face, like HL. He has that charisma, without a doubt, which makes him even more dangerous. So if I had said no, I am a communist, and here we nationalize the means of production and everything else, it does not work. But the issue is the cultural base. It is that people think, well, in Chile, being a communist should definitely be a reason for shame. It should be like a social stigma, like a person who has not showered in a year, from which everyone runs away, because communism is a totalitarian creed, criminal. It is a philosophy for criminals. That is communism, from the theoretical point and from the practical point. So we have to convince people that what matters is freedom, liberal democracy, and not all these siren songs. We are going to give them this or that, is basically to end up destroying it, not only in freedom, but also in their well-being. If you think that the pension reform of Minister Jar and the Friends of Chile Vamos is going to be free, it is going to be free. Women's unemployment is rising. We do not have money. The fiscal system is super indebted. We are not going to get out of it. Maybe Elon Musk will fix the problem with all the robots that Tesla is going to release. I saw in an interview recently that he said that with all the technological revolution, there is going to be an explosion of wealth, that the world is not going to be dozens of times richer, but thousands, or hundreds of thousands of times richer. If that is the case, there will be practically no shortage of resources. There will be some, but there will be more Van Goghs, but there will be a lot of everything else. But I think that is going to take a while. So let's not risk it. And let's do everything possible. And you, please, convince your relatives. Explain to your friends. Make your videos on TikTok, on YouTube, on Instagram. And especially women, please. We need you to join this fight. We need more women, not because of the quota. But, yes, it is not because of the quota. We need more voices of women, speaking to them, telling them to wake up. They will be better, happier with their lives, more fulfilled, if they don't get infected by the mental parasites that sell them, the teas, and all these recalcitrant feminists that walk around, and when it's their turn to be raped, well, I don't know who they are. So, that is very important. And don't dye your hair purple. Don't stop using deodorant. Please. All these things are important. Don't go into the postmodern decadence of our cult, because deodorant is not a social construction. Well, a big round of applause for Axel Kaiser. This was the last talk of Orica. On Thursday we have our practice activity, and we will have it tomorrow. So Axel.